Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, released in December of 2024, retailing for $69.99, available on PC, Xbox, and coming to PlayStation as of the time of recording. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle takes place between the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade. The game starts with a dream sequence that serves as a tutorial. It's a recreation of the iconic Idol and Boulder scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Upon waking from this, we see Indy at Marshall College, and it just so happens there's a break-in happening right now. A giant Catholic monk has come to steal a cat mummy. And the giant actually succeeds, thus kicking off a globe-trotting adventure for Indy. Before the game's over, you'll see Vatican City, and get to encounter Benito Mussolini. You'll find yourself in Egypt, conveniently next to all the landmarks the average person is aware of. You'll find yourself in the Himalayan mountains, dealing with a World War II German battleship that's on top of one of these mountains somehow. A brief trip to Shanghai, and then you'll find yourself in Siam. And because of these exotic locales, you get to encounter all three of the major Axis powers from World War II. Gameplay-wise, there's basically two parts here. There are parts where you are Indy and you have to sneak around places. Sometimes you can find costumes to make that easier. Sometimes you just have to stay in the shadows. Enemies don't spot you right away, though. They give you a moment to kind of be like, hey, is that guy sneaking around there? Oh no, he ducked behind something, we're good. If you do screw up the stealth, you get to have a fist fight with the enemy. Sometimes you can find one-handed and two-handed weapons to make this easier. Sometimes you have access to a gun. But if you fire a gun, you're usually just gonna alert all the other people in the area, so you usually don't want to use a gun. The other part of gameplay is when you're dealing with an archaeological site. During these parts, you're doing a lot of puzzle solving, but not very difficult puzzle solving. It's a lot of place this here, do these things in a particular order. Even if you manage to avoid the very overt clues, you're not gonna have trouble with these puzzles. And I don't take this as a negative in the game, actually. But be careful, because much like in the Indiana Jones movies, if you screw up a puzzle, it could be lethal. There are boss fights throughout this game. In all of them, you are fighting a giant. Sometimes they're people, in one case it's a snake, but mostly you're doing this with your fists. And in the later ones, you have a handicap of some kind. They go on too long and are not fun. Really, I'm not sure why this game needed boss fights, as the combat is easily the weakest element of this game. But what I've described so far is simply the main story of the game. In most of the areas you find yourself in, there is a lot of extra things to do if you're willing to track them down. These take the form of fight clubs, side missions where you rescue someone or find something, among other fairly mundane objectives. But these side missions are always bundled with some interesting cutscenes. And in fact, the cutscenes of this, in both the side missions and main story, are great. And honestly, if you just took the cutscenes from the main story and edited them together, you would probably have a pretty good Indiana Jones movie that would almost certainly be better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull or Dial of Destiny. So is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle worth your time and money? The gameplay is fairly simple, but in fairness does pretty much accurately reflect the Indiana Jones movies. The cutscenes are very well polished, as I mentioned. So yes, I do want to recommend Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. However, I don't know that I can recommend it for its full $70 price tag, as the main story is only going to run about 11 hours if you just purely do that. However, if you're a completionist and you're going to do every single thing that can be found in the game, you'll be closer to 30 hours. But even then, I think this is the kind of game that would be great at about a $40 price point. And of course, at times it does get a little hard to suspend disbelief. And this isn't necessarily due to the overt supernatural elements, as those are after all par for the course in an Indiana Jones story. But on the other hand, when you're climbing the Himalayan mountains to get to a battleship on top of one of them, it's a little hard to not laugh. I think this game could have been improved a bit by removing that completely, and then maybe doing something with the so-called Nephilim. The giant monk from the beginning apparently being one of them. Although not giant in a grand scale, just giant in that he seems somewhat taller than Indy. But then again, whenever you try to explain something, it usually gets less interesting as you get more concrete information. I'm also a little curious as to how Indy would know how to speak a hereto unknown language perfectly when he first figures out how to read it, as there's a world of difference between translating text and actually speaking those words. But of course, if he didn't, we wouldn't be able to do some magic teleportation with these ancient artifacts. And my issue here isn't the teleporting ancient artifacts. Not at all. It's more with him finding an unknown language that he's only reading and then knowing exactly how to pronounce it. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.